Greetings to all of you and Happy New Year. I'm Nancy Cooper, one of the founding members of the AGO Task Force for Gender Equity, and I'm here to tell you that you are really in for a treat today. Lynn Lowy's presentation, Unusual Voices, is an invaluable resource for those of you who are looking for more diverse and inclusive repertoire, or for those of you who are just interested in learning more about music by women composers, or perhaps are even just looking for an educational and entertaining way to spend an hour or so. I can, without hesitation, promise you that you will be struck by the remarkable breadth and scope of the repertoire highlighted today by Lynn. Lynn's presentation will be followed by a panel discussion featuring members of the AGO, the British Society for Women Organists, and the Task Force for Gender Equity. There is sure to be something in the repertoire highlighted today by Lynn that you could incorporate into your music making on March 6th, which is Woman Composer Sunday, and you'll learn more about later in this video. We are all very, very excited about this collaboration between the AGO, the SWO, and the Royal College of Organists. More information about the event will be forthcoming in the weeks and months ahead. For now, on to Lynn Lowy and Unusual Voices. Enjoy.
Good evening. I'm Lynn Lowy. I'm a member of the Denver Rocky Mountain chapter of the American Guild of Organists, and also a member of the Task Force on Gender Equity. I'd like to thank Billy Busby Smyth, our dean, Ricky Moyer, our program director, and Linda Joy Mack, our district convener, for their invitation to talk about women composers. I'd also like to thank Park Hill United Church of Christ for graciously sharing their sanctuary. I'll begin by quoting organist Nicole Keller from a forthcoming article on Florence Price. She's talking about repertory. The music we call canon repertoire is with us for a lot of reasons. It has passed the tests of time, meaning familiar music gives us a sense of belonging, and we use it to talk to people and to signify. But the unusual music is another way we can communicate. End of quote. What is unusual music? Unfortunately, it covers virtually all the music composed by women and people of color, overlooked when those textbooks were written. I agree with Nicole. Our standard repertory needs these new and not the usual voices. Stepping into uncharted territory, this fresh air is good for us, even life-giving as artists. There's another problem with an all-male core repertory. The percentage of women joining the AGO has been on a steady decline. In 1930, women used to be 50% of guild members. But this year, only 25% of new members are women. Could there be a cause and effect here? The music in our recital halls, schools, universities, houses of worship continues to exclude women composers as if their artistic voices don't matter or are second-rate. Frankly, these inherited and perpetuated stereotypes need to be thrown out the window. We risk becoming irrelevant when we stick to an outdated script. Not just irrelevant, we risk the perception that only men, only white men, matter. We can do better. This talk will introduce some remarkable composers who may help us achieve that more diverse repertory. Elfrida Andr&e, born in 1841, was a brilliant, versatile Swedish composer. A pioneer, she was the first woman organist in Sweden, the first conductor, the first to be a cathedral music director in all of Europe. All this in a country where women could not attend university, own property, or vote. She was a lifelong advocate for women's rights. Her open-minded father insisted that both his daughters have a comprehensive education growing up. At the age of 14, Elfrida went to Stockholm to study privately at the Royal Academy of Music. Then she asked the school's permission to take the graduation exams. They agreed, she passed, and through this way she became the first woman in Sweden to have a degree from the Royal Academy of Music. Her organ teacher recommended her for a church job, but there was a law against women holding church organist positions. Plus, the clergy and the archbishop nixed the idea. The sight of a woman on the organ bench was highly inappropriate. Elfrida and her father got the law changed, so unmarried women over 25 could become organists. She took her first job at a Finnish church in Stockholm. 7 years later, the Cathedral of Gothenburg position came open. She applied, and competing against 7 men, was awarded the position, becoming the first woman in all of Europe to be a cathedral organist. The next was in 1987. She wrote about 100 pieces, large-scale symphonic music, an opera, 2 masses, 2 organ symphonies, chamber music, cantatas, and more. After her first symphony was sabotaged in performance, Elfrida was advised to stick to piano music. She refused, saying, "There are plenty of women writing that kind. I'll do larger works." And from that point on, she conducted her own music. Her music exhibits Bach-like rigor combined with Italianate lyricism and vivacity. Her manuscripts were unpublished until the 1990s. The Organ Symphony No. 1 took years to write. The first version was a more Germanic-sounding sonata, but a trip to Paris in 1882 inspired rewrites. In the final version, the piece opens in dark B minor, restlessness. There's a majestic chorale. And in the finale, we hear the triumphant sounds of French grand opera. Elizabeth Stirling was born in 1819 when England's population was expanding and hundreds of new churches needed organists. Women stepped into the role, which allowed them to work outside the home, earn a small living, and still be respectable. Anne Stainer, Eliza Wesley, Anne Mounsey Bartholomew, Oliveria Prescott. Their names are listed in the 19th century Macassin Guide to the Churches of London. They composed voluntaries, anthems, and cantatas for work. Stirling represents, if you will, the era when women entered our profession in significant numbers. She was raised in a comfortable home with a solid music education, but at 16, her father went bankrupt and she had to support herself. An outstanding organist, she played the most difficult Bach literature in well-reviewed recitals at a time when many English organs still lacked full pedal boards. She had 2 good church jobs over 40 years and accompanied a large community choir. Stirling composed solid practical pieces for her church and choir in the style of Mendelssohn's slow movements, Samuel Wesley, William Best. Her 6 pedal fugues and 8 slow movements were published by Novello in 1857. In the 19th century, universities offered education to men, but not to women. Change came grudgingly, with Cambridge University the last holdout in 1948. Stirling herself applied for a degree from Oxford University, submitting the required composition, but hiding her gender by using only her initials. Her composition, Psalm 130 for choir and orchestra, passed the exam, but when she was discovered to be a woman, they denied her the degree. The bustles and tight bodices of Victorian England fell out of fashion. They were replaced with more comfortable clothes. That newfangled bicycle, it allowed women to leave home without a chaperone. In spite of these liberating trends, many job announcements said, "Ladies not eligible." A further backlash would come from the conservative Oxford movement within the Church of England. They replaced mixed choirs of men and women with all men and boys. Women singers and organists were no longer welcome. It would take nearly 100 years to reverse this anti-woman trend. The point is that women entered this profession mid-19th century, but very quickly encountered pushback. Dame Ethel Smyth was a dazzling, articulate, and extremely successful composer of large works, including her Mass in D and 6 operas. She was the first woman to have an opera performed at the Metropolitan in New York City. She was made a Dame of the British Empire. Oxford and Durham universities bestowed honorary doctorates on her. Even so, she wrote in her memoirs that being a woman was a serious handicap to her career. She stopped composing for 2 years to dedicate her time to women's suffrage, including a prison term for 2 months for throwing a brick through a parliament minister's window. As a young woman, Smyth went to Leipzig to study composition and stayed for 10 years. She knew the whole gang: Schumann, Grieg, Dvorak, Mahler, Brahms, while also developing a lifelong love for Bach. She was inspired by Brahms's music also, if not his attitude towards women. They both wrote a set of chorale preludes right about the same time. His were published in 1886. Hers were rejected by Breitkopf and Hertel, saying no woman's music could sell. She sensibly replied, "Unless it is published, how can music possibly get known?" Her chorale preludes were eventually published by Novello in 1913 and received this review in the Musical Times. Dr. Ethel Smyth is best known as a writer of rugged and highly emotional orchestral music. In these works, she has achieved simplicity, regular outline, and intellectual calm. The chorale preludes are written throughout in 4 real parts. There are 2 composers who can write living music in this form and do it well: Dame Ethel Smyth and Sir Hubert Parry. Schwing dich auf is an ornamented chorale, similar to Bach's Schmücke dich or Allein Gott, works she certainly knew. The next 2 pieces are included to make a suggestion about repertory. We have 500 years of music by men, but only about 150 years by women. Because of all the obstacles, of course. They couldn't go to college and they couldn't get church jobs. How can we redress this balance with the understanding that cultural sexism was behind it all? As the Bishop of New Hampshire, Jean Robinson, used to say, "It's time to move the fence." What he means as the first openly gay bishop is that we can right historic wrongs by being more inclusive now. One way to increase repertory is to add piano and harpsichord music. Take Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel, the older sister of Felix. She had the same education as her brother, but there were cultural stigmas about women working for money. Felix was her biggest curmudgeon, even though he signed his name to some of her compositions. So she worked at home, composing in her parlor 460 works, including 125 for piano. She wrote a very few pieces for the organ, her wedding music when he let her down, but the writing is a bit awkward and showing her unfamiliarity with the instrument. So think instead about playing her piano music, or that of Amy Beach, or the harpsichord music of Baroque composer Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre. We are keyboardists, after all. Think outside the fence. Yet another way to increase repertory is with transcriptions. We play the orchestral music of Handel, Purcell, Elgar, and others on the organ. Maybe you've played that Sicilienne by Maria Theresia von Paradis. It was a piece of instrumental music. Can we have more transcriptions like that? Thanks to Krista Rakic, who transcribed this flute sonata by Princess Anna Amalia, the sister of Friedrich the Great, we have this charming organ trio. Florence Price was the first African-American woman to succeed as a classical composer. Her symphony in E minor was premiered by the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in 1933. A native of Little Rock, Arkansas, she attended the New England Conservatory and in 1905 graduated at the top of her class. She made her career in Chicago, where she was a member of the Chicago Club of Women Organists. We can thank Calvert Johnson for editing all 5 volumes of her organ music. Nicole Keller has this to say about Price's organ music. Florence Price lived in a time of upheaval and change in the United States, especially for those of African descent. She was born soon after Reconstruction as a child of the segregated South into a family of means, education, and culture, when most Blacks lived in poverty and illiteracy. Her eventual departure from the South during the Great Migration proved to be fertile soil for her artistic endeavors, though not without its challenges. Her organ music weaves 2 cultures together, Western European and Black American, to create something new and unusual. Each culture enhancing the other with its unique traits. This was a very bold notion for her time and culture, and still sends shockwaves through the system today. The incorporation of her works into our canon, our identity as organists, helps us to stretch the imagination of students and deepen their understanding of the uses of the instrument. Her works paint a more complete picture of organ composition in 20th century America. Jeanne Demessieux was born in the south of France in 1921. A child prodigy, she was named the titular organist of Saint-Esprit in Paris when she was 12 years old. At 15, she began studying with the great Marcel Dupré, her teacher for the next 11 years. In 1946, he called her the greatest organist of all generations. The woman's virtuosity was without equal. As a touring organist, she played 700 concerts, ending her programs with the improvisation of a 4-movement symphony. She performed 2,500 works from memory and traveled without scores. And yet what most people remember is that she played in high heels. In 1947, a year after Demessieux's spectacular debut recital, she somehow offended her teacher. No one, including Demessieux, understood, but Dupré broke off all contact for the rest of her life. Seen with our modern eyes, this was an abuse of power due to the student-teacher relationship and the fact that she came to him as a 15-year-old. Disowning her after years of her single-minded devotion was psychologically traumatic and a professional stab in the back. For the next 15 years, she couldn't get a recital in Paris, her hometown and the musical capital. Organist Stephen Tharp, who's recorded all Demessieux's works, says that her compositions from this time bear an emotional weight and complexity he thinks stems from this rupture with Dupré. I bring this up because Demessieux was the best of the best, but her professional success was still precarious, dependent on, and seriously damaged by one man. Demessieux's story garners a lot of print, but she wasn't the only French woman composer. Cécile Chaminade, Mel Bonis, Yvonne Desportes, Elsa Barren, Jean Joulin, and countless others wrote organ music that languishes in manuscript or out-of-print publications. In a country where women could not vote before 1945, their second-class status was status quo. This time period is rich terrain for research, and I hope through some intentional work and popular demand, many more works by French women will come to light, and Jeanne Demessieux's life can be put into a wider context. The last composer is alive and well. Mary Beth Bennett didn't have to change any laws to be an organist. She went to excellent schools and held important jobs. She can dress however she likes, and she can vote. Bennett is only one of many composers I might have chosen. Pamela Decker, Rachel Laurin, Margaret Sandreski, Cecilia McDowell, Chelsea Chen, Marianne Kim, and Dorothy Papadakis. There are so many good living composers. But unless their music is published, performed, and intentionally programmed with an eye toward gender balance, it will vanish. Mary Beth Bennett wrote this partita on the Gregorian chant, Veni Creator Spiritus, Come Holy Spirit. The piece begins with a quiet, atmospheric birdsong in openness and wonder. It concludes with a toccata and the chant declaimed in the petals. International Women's Day began in the early 1900s when women organized to protest child labor, unsafe working conditions, and long hours, and to demand a minimum wage and the right to vote. Their collective and persistent voices brought about important changes in labor law. In more recent years, issues like Me Too and Time's Up have energized the need for better policies and laws around sexual abuse and sexual harassment. The Women's March in 2017 was the largest single-day protest in American history. But how do we, as musicians, connect our work to International Women's Day? This is a time to honor women composers. It's also a time to protest their silence and invisibility the other weeks of the year. Women may be able to vote, but we're still vulnerable when it comes to equal pay, equal opportunity hiring, and representation, including in our own profession. What can we do? In March 2022, that's just 4 months away, the American Guild of Organists will collaborate with the Society of Women Organists and the Royal College of Organists for a Women Composer Weekend. Organists are invited to play a work by a woman and post the recording or video to social media. I hope we'll all participate, creating a chorus of voices commemorating the artistic voices of women. As we stretch the core repertory, as we learn new languages, so to speak, The AGO and all the partner institutions we touch will become more representative, healthier. That's a big win. We'll demonstrate that women's voices matter, and we'll send a message to our youngest members that we and they can be unusually proud to be members of the American Guild of Organists. Thank you.
Well, it's wonderful to have you all here and to be part of this discussion. Very, very exciting. And I look forward to a wonderful collaboration this afternoon and beyond. Alison, my first question is for you. How and why was the Society of Women Organists founded? And can you give us some background about your activities and your goals, etc.? We would love to hear from you about that.
The Society of Women Organists was founded 3 years ago by Anne Marsden Thomas and Ghislaine Rees-Trapp, just because there are so many male organists in the UK and but many brilliant women organists, and we just felt it would be nice to have our own society. So they rapidly recruited quite a few members, and the first committee meeting was a vibrant discussion around what sort of things we might do. This has rapidly developed. There's a wonderful website, many events taking place, and in particular, a wonderful database of organ music by women composers for organ, and including some choral music by women composers as well. We don't exclude men. We've got some men members as well, and just welcome anyone who's interested in organ music, but also in helping to promote the fact that women can play the organ too, and that there's many of us around and out there.
How large is your organization?
I think the latest count is just over 200 members. And last year, after Women Composer Sunday last year, that saw a boost to the membership. And we're regularly recruiting new members of all ages and all levels of experience. women who play in many different settings, either small parish churches or cathedrals and Oxbridge colleges, and all over the UK and worldwide now. We've got some American friends joining us.
Do you have any particular activities coming up in the near future?
So there are several things coming up. There's the launch of the Adjustable Benches campaign is coming up very soon, because organists come in many shapes and sizes, and some of us, well, certainly in UK churches, I don't know what it's like in America, but in UK churches, many of the benches are just one height. You're very lucky if you find a properly adjustable bench. So that's one of the major things that is coming up. We've got Women Composer Sunday coming up on Sunday the 6th of March to just celebrate the many wonderful pieces of music written by many women composers. That's not to say don't play them the rest of the year. Many of us do play a decent selection of music all year, but that's just to highlight some of the work that's been done on the database. And we're hoping to have some online coverage for that and lots of participation. We're just about to start a group for women that have started learning the organ later in life as adults. That might be 20-year-olds that have learned other instruments or learned piano maybe and are coming to church organ later, and just as a sort of support group for that. Those are the main things coming up in the next few months.
That sounds wonderful. And I might point out that AGO is partnering on the March 6th celebration of women composers. We're very excited about that we're encouraging all of our members to program music of female composers on that Sunday especially, but yes, you're right, all year long, indeed. Thank you. Nicole, my next question is for you. First of all, congratulations on your excellent article on Florence Price, which just came out in the January TAO. If folks haven't had a chance to read it yet, I encourage you to read this wonderful piece by Nicole. And here in Boston, we have a little bit of special claim to Florence Price because she went to school and got her degree here at the New England Conservatory. So we have a lot of respect and interest in the renaissance of her music, which is very important. Could you tell us a little bit about your work on Florence Price and why and how her music enriches our repertoire?
Of course. I was first introduced to Florence Price actually in graduate school. So in the late 90s, my organ teacher, David Higgs, handed me a score and said, you should check this out. And I played with it for a little while and I put it down for quite a while. And I really didn't hear anyone else playing either that work or anything else really until the last couple of years. And I think these new editions that have been published, thanks to Calvert Johnson, have been really helpful in making sure that people know her music and have access to it. So that, for me, was the genesis of a lot of it. And during the pandemic, I was asked by a couple of colleagues to present a few online classes, a few people who knew that I played some of her works. So that really started quite a bit of my work in doing a little bit more research on her and her life and her organs and her music in general, which is really quite fascinating. I know we're focusing mostly on her organ music, but her vocal music, her instrumental music, her orchestral music, is really just spectacular. So I've been lucky to sort of explore a bit of that and to play a bit of her other music as well. And I think, and I talk a little bit about in the article about what her music is. It's this combination of her life experience as a Black person living in America and her education as a classically trained organist and pianist that really melds together. And I think for her organ work especially, that's really where I think we see some interesting things going on. And technically, as I say in the article, some of those things actually make our life a little bit more difficult as organists because she asks some pretty difficult things of us technically as far as managing the instrument and managing these very complex and very dense textures and getting a good sound out of the instrument. So I find that as an organist and as a teacher, pretty fascinating. And I think there's a lot that style of music and that thinking, that her way of thinking through music can inform us about that time period in particular, about American music in general.
Do you have any specific recommendations for people who have not played any of Florence Price's music for what compositions would be good for them to start with? What would be a good introduction for someone who has not experienced her music before?
I think the best place to start, and that will depend on your technical abilities. The best place to start maybe is the shorter works, and there's a whole volume of those. And in the volume that contains the Passacaglia and Fugue, there are also some other shorter works there. That's a good introduction, I think, to her writing style, to her sound, to her use of color. Most of those pieces are fairly simple. They're not very difficult. If you're ready to tackle something a little bit more difficult, you can look into the variations on a folk tune. You can look into the suite. You can look into the sonata. You very quickly get into some pretty difficult technical things there. But I think that's the suite especially is where we hear some more individualistic things about her voice. The sonata was definitely planned after Guillemont's Sonata No. 1, and if you play the two right next to each other, you can hear many, many, many similarities. But I think her individual sound you will hear mostly in the suite in her organ music for sure. And if you're a real veteran, you can tackle that Passacaglia and Fugue. It's an interesting work. It's a long work, but it's very difficult as well.
Thank you. Those are great recommendations. I hope a lot of people discover the music of Florence Price as a result of your work and other people's work on the topic. Wonderful. Michelle, I have a couple of questions for you. How did you choose your graduate program? Talk a little bit about that. And what advice do you have for other women organists who are considering graduate school and weighing their options?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. So as far as my application process went, I was really determined to study with a woman professor. And so I actually went on the AGO's website and I went through the entire list of all the doctor programs. And I looked through every single one and made a list of all the women organists that were teaching at these levels. It was not very even, I could tell you that. So, that really narrowed my choices a lot. And from there, I just started reaching out to the different professors in the different universities because a lot of my work has to do with gender equity. And I wasn't going to go someplace that wasn't going to promote this. And some of the places I did reach out to weren't exactly the right fits. Some I never heard back from. And eventually I ended up at the University of Southern California with Professor Cherry Rhodes and her husband, Dr. Ladd Thomas, who are extremely supportive and just, I don't know, for me, I really wanted to make sure that all my recitals had women composers on them. And that, when you approach that point with some people, they kind of like step back, like, well, why would you need that? And, for me, it's, I need to see myself in the music. I can't tell you how long that I've, a lot of the repertoire I've been introduced to has been men repertoire. A lot of the concerts I've gone to, I didn't even really know that women went on and got these other degrees, other than my professor in my undergrad just kind of was like, go do it, like go try it. And it wasn't until like kind of going to conventions and talking with people that I started meeting more people. But as far as like my age group goes, there's not a lot of us, a lot of young women organists. And so when we kind of find each other, I know like we have like a text chat with all of us in it, because it's nice just to talk with each other and discuss some of the things that we're having. And I think a lot of it is that it's almost like a non-judgmental zone. Because I think sometimes, I know for myself, when I've brought up ideas, they've either been shut down or kind of like, why would you even ask that type of question? But for me, I didn't come from an organ background. I didn't even start organ until undergrad. I had no idea it was even a career that like people could do other than like sometimes on Sundays. Like I had just just no idea. And I'm so glad that there's, as I go on, that there's more and more resources and more people to talk to. And so for me now, a lot of my work is trying to focus on, promoting the image of women in the organ, and also for young women to get interested in the instrument. And so, I go into different schools. I do like Meet the Instrument, and I do different video like series with like the kids and show them inside the instrument and like how it works. And I play some different things from them, and give an opportunity to like ask questions about it. What does this do? Why? What can you do with this? I didn't even know this instrument existed, that type of thing. And it's just, I really wish I would have had that, because I think it would have just made so many things easier for me. And personally, I don't think I would have questioned myself as much, because it's hard when you don't see yourself to keep doing it every day and think like, yeah, like this is meant for me. I don't know if I'll ever maybe feel that it is meant for me, but I'm still going to keep pushing it, and hopefully make it so that it is meant for other people and they don't feel so like singled out, because there's nothing like walking in a room and realizing there's only one of you. So yeah.
I'm afraid we've all been there. You mentioned the fact that there are fewer young women entering the profession and becoming organists and going to graduate school, et cetera, which unfortunately right now is true. What specific advice do you have for a young woman who may be interested in pursuing a career in the organ world and realizing that she's going to have a lot of challenges? What specific advice would you have for a young woman as she considers her options?
I think definitely focus on your own journey with the instrument. I know it's really easy, especially, I'm just thinking of my own experience, because I didn't start organ until my undergraduate, and all of the other people in my studio had been doing organ for years, since like high school, and knew that they were going to go to a graduate program. And that was like, I was just trying to play a hymn. Like that was, I was like, I was getting a piano degree. So I was like, how could I not play this hymn right? And so I think really focusing on your own journey and what you're learning with it, and then what you could do with that learning to give back to others. And so, I think about when I'm working with the church, the things that I can do with choirs and to connect with other people, and bringing in new composers like Florence Price and talking about that with people. I think that's so important, and such a good focus, because then it feels like you're really adding in to the history of the organ. You're really part of it. You're really pushing, the envelope. And I think that is just such a cool thing to be part of. And I think, just being able to, I think, reach out like I think every women organist I've ever met, I've always been like, hey, what's your story? What are you doing? Do you want to, like, what's your email? Like, let's just, and just, I met so many people that way. And honestly, every time I meet somebody new, it's such a relief, because it's like, oh, it's not just me. Other people are searching for these things too. And just that sense of community is just really great. So, for any young organists, especially young women organists that are going in, I think just, be really open. Don't be afraid to explore new things. And I say, bring your male colleagues with you. I'm never afraid to call them out and be like, I think maybe we should have a women composer come in and do something, or, maybe we should have a woman performance of some type, and just put it on the table and see what they say. And I find that, when you're friends with these people, it's a lot like, oh yeah, like we should do that. Like, of course, as opposed to, well, you're just somebody bringing this in. So I never think it's like a but thing. I always think it's an and. Let's do this with this and this, not over there, but together.
Thank you. That was so well articulated. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
I have questions that I'd like to just pose for group discussion for anybody who wants to jump in. We've all acknowledged the fact that women composers need promotion of their music. and we're finding ways to do that. What specific things do you think could really work well to help us promote the music of women composers?
I was considering that at the stage when one does a lot of new repertoire learning, i.e. at music college or university, or when doing a master's programme, and taking formal exams like Royal College of Organists exams, it's about engaging in a dialogue and encouraging exam boards to include more music by women composers, so that you're automatically building more pieces in your repertoire, and then just making a conscious choice every time you're programming, as the previous speaker was saying, to include music by women composers as often as possible. And sometimes, like a couple of years ago, I did a recital of all music by women composer in a lunchtime, and it was the first time it had been done in Bristol. So it's just engaging positively with things like that, just to promote and be enthusiastic.
Michelle, in your graduate studies, are you encouraged to find music of women composers and to program it? Do your professors support that and give you suggestions of repertoire you might explore?
Yeah, so actually I feel like getting this doctorate has been the most support that I've ever received. Not that I haven't received support before, but specifically to do it, to the point that, you know, a lot of the other organists make sure that they also have women composers on their program. Actually, my one friend just did a recital and did a work by Florence Price, and we were just talking about how he should, because we recorded it, how we should publish it on YouTube, because we were talking about how difficult it is sometimes with some of these new works, is that there's no recordings to listen to of them. And it's kind of hard to say, like, especially I think, like, you know, being like still in college and stuff, like, hey, I'm just going to spend all this money on this new music. Hope I get some stuff that I could play and like. And so, you know, I think that kind of is the challenge sometimes. So, you know, we've been talking a lot about recording, like any piece, like any women piece that we do, record it and post it on one of our YouTubes. Because then the chances of somebody like Googling it and being like, hey, I wonder what this sounds like, or I wonder how long this is, or I wonder, you know, what type of registration somebody else used. Because that's the other thing, is a lot of this music doesn't have specific registrations on it. So it's kind of like a guessing game I think you play sometimes, like what could sound okay here. But I also think it's really cool. Like right now I'm playing a piece by Brenda Portman. It's called Monument, and it's a newer work, and it's been so much fun working on it with my teacher, because we've been doing just that. We've been trying to explore different sounds that we could get on the organ, and talking about, you know, what she might have been coming up with and the different imagery in the piece. And honestly, I feel like I've learned so much. I don't want to say so much more, but there's been so many more learning opportunities in this piece than I think in some of the other ones I've done. And for me, it's been a real connection with it. And so that's what I think, you know, we talk about like in our programs that we plan or the committees we're on, to stress this importance of incorporating women. And I think, you know, I think it's really encouraging because a lot of the young organists I've met are kind of all about it. There's not as much like kind of resistance to it. They're like, yeah, like, of course, like we should do that. Or like, even I'm just thinking of my friend when I said, like, you should put that on YouTube. He goes, oh yeah, I guess that would be like a helpful thing. I said, yes, it would. I said, that'd be great. And, you know, and they're also really interested in the Women's Sunday. So we've been talking about how to, you know, incorporate different things in our church jobs and that type of thing. So like I said, I think it's just really having a conversation about it, having a conversation with your teacher about it. And I think it's okay too, that like some people just don't know how to do it. And I think that's, you know, if they don't know how, you go, well, hey, this is what I kind of see going on. And I've really been interested lately in repertoire lists, because a lot of universities have gone to like this system of like, this is where you should be for level 1, and this is where you should be for level 2, level 3, blah, 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 all the way up. And they have to make those lists. And so I think that that's where the conversation should start. They should be looking at these lists and going, hey, I see, we have this many by men. Maybe we should try to incorporate more. Again, a conversation about and add this in, because look what else it could add in to the overall learning experience of the students.
Thank you for that. Another question to pose to the group. Is writing for the organ especially challenging and difficult for women? If so, how? And what advice would you give to a woman composer who expresses interest in writing for the instrument? Nicole.
Yes, I don't know that writing for the organ in particular would be difficult for women in particular. I think it's just difficult. It's a very difficult instrument to write for, and I have found with any newer work that I've played, whether it's by a woman or a man, it's obvious to tell from the first few moments with the piece how comfortable that composer is with the organ. So the need to have more people, more composers who are familiar with the instrument, who play the instrument. So of course that trickles down to having more women who play the instrument, are familiar with the instrument, and are familiar with what the instrument can do by studying different types of repertoire, whether it's standard repertoire or whether it's repertoire that uses the instrument in different ways, to really help this process of writing for the instrument, so that you can approach any type of instrument and say, okay, I'm playing this particular piece. Let's say I'm playing Florence Price, and when I'm at an instrument that the meat of her repertoire plays well, iconic American symphonic instruments, I know exactly what to do. But if I find myself at, let's say, an Orgelbewegung instrument or a neo-Baroque instrument, can I make this work here? What different types of sounds do I need to use? How do I translate what Price's, what her vision for the sound and for the textures are to this particular instrument? So that means that, of course, I, as a player, have to understand these different instruments, what makes them sound good, and how I can get good sound out of them. And I think it's helpful for the composer as well, if you would like your piece to be played on as many different instruments as possible, to say, am I writing in a style that's really going to restrict how many instruments can play this piece? And you may decide this is what my voice is for this piece, and perhaps it's not going to be able to be played everywhere. But if I want this to really, be universally adaptable, there are certain things I think you have to keep in mind. It's a tough instrument. It's hard to play, it's hard to learn, it's hard to write for. But if you don't spend a lot of time playing it, I think for some composers and some I've talked to, it's hard for them to even know where to begin. And I don't think that has much to do with being a woman. It's just exposure to the instrument, and perhaps because there are less women playing it, that makes it certainly a problem.
Thank you for that. One final topic to pose for some discussion. What does a diversity of voices bring to our profession artistically? If you could each give a little perspective on that, I think that would be very interesting and helpful. Michelle?
I think it brings growth, because I think when you actually start making space for different types of people, and different genders and different races, I think it brings growth, because it brings what it says. It brings so much diversity. It brings so much newness. It brings so many different things that maybe you've never thought about, or even pretended to think about. Things that maybe weren't even on your radar, but all of a sudden now here it is. And it's so amazing what people could do when they look at these different things and they work together with them. And I really hope that that's, kind of where we go with all of this, is realizing that all of these different voices have so much to add, rather than to think that they're distracting. I think it's it's so much about what it could be when we work together and how many things we could create together.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other comments? Nicole?
Yeah, I think it's part of our responsibility as artists, frankly, to seek out everything we possibly can about our instrument and about the music that is written for it and the things that impact the instrument. So, there should really be no barriers on whether or not it's standard repertoire, whether or not it's something that uses the instrument in a traditional way, and frankly, whether or not we think it's something that people may like. We have to explode those boundaries as well and say, okay, is there value in this piece of music? I may not like listening to it all the time, but there may be something in there that leads us to the next musical discovery, that leads us to the next chapter and whatever is going to happen to the organ. So I think it's just a part of the process of becoming a whole artist, becoming a whole organist in looking at everything that is available to us.
Thank you. Alison, do you want to add anything to sort of summarize and wrap up for us today?
I was just going to add into what Michelle was saying, that there's great strength in diversity and listening to many people's experiences from whatever background, and just a great joy to open a new piece of music by a woman composer that one might not have heard before or played before, and start learning something entirely different. But I think by working together with people from all backgrounds, we can really engage and just learn so much.
Thank you. Very well put. I think this has been a very informative and exciting discussion. And I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. Thank you so much for your participation. This has been wonderful. Thank you.